Today is Thursday, October the 23rd, 2014. This is the start of an interview with Mr. Edward Hallo at the Clinton-Macomb Public Library, Clinton Township, Michigan, in partnership with RSVP of Macomb. Mr. Hallo is 94 years old. He was born June the 14th, 1920. July. Okay, excuse me. Mr. Hallo currently resides in New Hudson, Michigan. My name is Dave Brusso. I'll be the interviewer. And Gary Migley will be the videographer. Mr. Hallo, for the record, would you state the branch of service in which you serve?
I was in the 501st, 101st Airborne Division, 501st Parachute Regiment, Company A, where did you say?
Could you explain what all that means in English?
Well, actually, to begin with, I didn't want the Army, I didn't want the Navy, I didn't want the Marines. And I heard about the paratroopers, and I thought I would volunteer for the paratroops. So I had to join the Army to get into paratroops. You had to volunteer for the paratroops. So I had to join the Army to get into paratroops. Something different. And the reason why I joined was I didn't want to be drafted, because I might be drafted and put somewhere I didn't like. So this way I had a chance to pick my own branch of service.
You're already answering my second and third question.
Okay. And the paratroops was something new at that time, particular time.
That would have been really the start of the war.
That was in the beginning. We didn't know too much about it. It was experimental. We had back in those days, all you had was cotton, wool, and silk, and those parachutes were packed in silk in those days, and they had to be repacked every 30 days because silk freezes. You didn't have nylon or rayon in those days.
Really?
No. So, and at that time, you had to practice. I wasn't worried about jumping out of an airplane. I was just, once I got through basic training, which was really a tough thing to get through.
Well, when you say A company, what does that mean?
Every outfit had a battalion, which was ABC.
I see.
The second battalion was DEF. The third battalion was GHI. And 3 companies in each battalion. And then you had a headquarters company in each battalion also. And
what's the 501 mean then?
The 501st Parachute Regiment was a regiment of soldiers which comprised of 2,500 soldiers, and that was the 501. And in the 101st Airborne Division, you had the 501, the 502, and the 506. So there were 3 parachute regiments in a division.
Now, you got in that when you enlisted, or was that an assignment after?
There was an assignment afterwards.
Okay.
Yes, you trained as a soldier first. You went into
Okay.
basic training.
You're born in Toledo, Ohio.
Yes.
Is that where you were brought up?
For the first 5 years of my life, yes.
Okay, then
Then I moved to Detroit.
why?
Well, my dad had a job at Ford Motor Company, and at that particular time, they traveled back and forth from Toledo on a train.
That was very common during that period.
Yes.
A lot of folks like yourself were lured to Detroit because of the jobs.
Yes.
What did he do?
I think he just worked on some kind of production,
Uh-huh.
whatever. I don't know what it was.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to Northwestern High School
Okay.
in the west part of Detroit.
Were you a good student?
No, I would say average. Well, being good, you mean staying out of trouble? No, as a student myself, I had a hard time.
No, I really wasn't referring to that. I was
I had
referring to were you in the top half of the class
No.
or the middle of the class?
I had a hard time in the school because we spoke two different languages in our house.
Oh, what was the other?
I'm a full-blooded Syrian, and and my mother spoke very little English, and she was brought over here. My dad came over here in the late 1800s, and my grandmother, he came over here with his mother, and my grandmother, a little bit of a woman, very domineering, went back to the old country in Syria and took my mother away from her family and brought her back over here.
Oh,
And they got married in Peoria, Illinois, and she became a citizen. And then they started to raise a family. Well, as it was, there's the language, two different languages speaking in the house. And so studying in school and doing your homework thing was very hard for me because I had no one to help me with my homework or what to do or how to go about it. So it was very tough. We lived in, they moved to Toledo, Ohio, and that's where we were brought up the first 5 years of my life. And lived not too far away from a famous person called Amos Jacobs, if you know who he was.
Amos Jacobs.
Danny Thomas.
Danny Thomas.
Oh my goodness. I'll be darned. Is that right?
That's right.
Did you get a chance to meet him?
No, I didn't know who he was at the time.
Well, he wasn't popular at
So
the
I
beginning.
used to stay in school afterwards to do my homework, and if I didn't know how to do it, I'd have someone help me. A teacher.
Have you ever gone back to the homeland?
No. I wanted to, but late in life, because after my wife had passed away, my oldest daughter, who was a retired school teacher up in Grand Rapids, she's 65 years old today. We were both going to go back and see what the other part of the family was like.
Mm-hmm.
And as we found out, when my dad died, we were all brought up as Orthodox over here in this country. But when my dad died, I found out through one of the candors that he was actually originally Roman Catholic. And he must have had an argument with one of the priests back home or something like that. So we were all brought up. And when a woman marries in the Arab world, whoever she marries, she always takes up the religion of her husband. So we were all brought up as Orthodox. And only to find out later that my mother was also a Roman Catholic to begin with. Yes. And they love Americans. The people themselves love Americans, the Christians do, but the so-called governments don't get along with one another.
Yeah, yeah. Now, they became U.S. citizens?
My mother and then, yes, they were all citizens and, yeah, man.
I would think your father would have to work here, wouldn't he?
Yes,
Yeah.
and everybody in the family was citizens.
So you would have been 22 maybe when you
22.
enlisted?
22 when I enlisted.
How did
I had a
you?
deferred job at the beginning, to tell you the truth. I had worked in a tool room at Ford Motor Company, but I figured sooner or later, if I'm gonna get into this war, I better get into it now.
How did you get into that job at Ford?
Well, through my high school education, I did a little mechanical and tool grinding and stuff like
Okay.
that with micrometers and blueprint.
Yeah, that was my next question as to how you hung on for the age 22 before getting drafted, right at a time when they were taking anything that breathed.
Well, the job I had at Ford Motor Company was under the government at that
Yeah.
particular time. And
What were you doing?
I worked on precision tool grinding on magnetic chucks and blueprints. And,
Wow.
And
Now, what made you enlist?
well, I wanted to get out and get into the service because I didn't know if I was gonna be drafted sooner or later or not. They didn't tell me I was deferred from the service.
Oh, I see.
And so I put in for a discharge to enlist.
A lot of young men like yourself chose that route, but it was very prevalent that the branch of service you went into did what they wanted to based on the need. And if there was a big need, you could lose your deferment. And
That's right.
we're talking about, well, about a year after Pearl Harbor, so. Were you aware of what was going on?
Not really. Not really. It was something different, something new.
A lot of your high
Never
school
really-
buddies went?
Never really figured the danger of the situation.
Really?
Never.
Maybe that
We
was
never thought
better.
about getting
Yeah,
killed.
maybe that was better.
We never thought about getting killed once we got into the service. We trained. I'd say I was a virgin when I went into service. I didn't know how to shoot a gun. They learned, you learn that, you know. I was never a hunter or anything like that. You learned how to, you know, how to throw a grenade and what would happen if you didn't do it properly. And you learn all these things in basic training. And they teach you.
Now, this mechanical aptitude, where did that come from?
In high school, I just went into, I thought that would be the way for me to go, that particular route.
Were a number of your classmates placed similar to you?
I have no idea. I have no idea what happened to them people.
Were you able to build a relationship with a lot of the kids in the school with the language barrier?
I had no problem with the language barrier. I mean, I could speak English.
Oh.
Being brought up, there was no problem there. It's just, my problem was doing my homework. I didn't know how to do my homework when I had given a homework assignment to do. And if I had a mathematical problem and I didn't know how to go about it, I wasn't sure, that's why I stayed after school to do my homework. In high school, that's what I did.
Yeah, that must have been a heavy barrier to...
Well, I did that, and things were pretty rough. I mean, at home, my dad really didn't have a steady job, so to speak, because you never know when you got laid off of Forge if you're ever going to get called back to work, and they did lay people off every year at a certain time for changeover. And he decided he wanted to start a business of his own, and he got into the grocery store business,
Really?
which he probably knew nothing about, and he was a flop at that. So we really had a hard time getting. We ended up in broken homes afterwards. We had a pretty large family, and so we more or less had to, you know, do what we could do.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one brother and 3 sisters.
How many?
3 sisters, and in those days, I had one sister and myself, the only 2 that were able to speak English and come out alive. All the rest were, you would say, mentally retarded, because they couldn't speak and couldn't talk, but they could laugh and cry, and they could understand what you said to them in 2 different languages. And this is before the RH factor was known in those days.
Oh,
And so they were taken care of. My mother had a hard job taking care of those kids.
I can
And I finally ended up in a mentally retarded home like up in Lifford, Michigan, if you know what that was like.
What would it have been had they stayed in Syria?
I have
much
no
different?
idea. They all grew off the land.
Yeah.
My last name is Hallo. Hallo in Syrian means sweet. And when you say sweet in Arabic, you say hello. And they take the name from the land. When the land they grew grapes, the sweet stuff. They took the name from the land. That's what it was done. And so, and there were a lot of Hallos over in Lebanon and Syria. And
Now, your brothers, were they younger or older?
younger. And of course, a couple of them died of say after they were born or after a year or so when they had scarlet fever, sickness, something like that. You never had a doctor back in those days like a doctor would come to the house, back in those days. If someone died, the body was held in the house, so to speak, not at a funeral parlor. They didn't have funeral parlors in those days.
How did your folks react to you enlisting?
They didn't like it. And when I was that certain age, I just went down and enlisted. Whether they liked it or not, I wanted to get away and get out and get into the service.
Must have been tough on them though, eh?
Well, probably on my mother, it would have been, because I really don't know her, really didn't know her age. A woman married in the old country was married, was very young, and the man always they were married young in the old country. So we really never knew the proper age of my dad or my mother. And when I buried everybody in my family, I'm the last one now here alive. And we got them down as 90 years of age when they were buried. And that's as close as we can get to what because they never kept track of their age, we never really knew how old they were.
Do you remember where you went for boot camp?
Yes, I went down to Georgia, which is about 60 miles east of Atlanta, a little town called Toccoa, 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 Georgia.
What was the name of the...
And that was the name of the camp. It was a makeshift camp.
Oh.
Wasn't completely finished when we got down there. They had mattresses thrown on top of cement slabs and went down there in the cold of the bitter winter, when winters were really cold back in those days, not like as they are today, were much warmer because of the atmosphere, carbon in the atmosphere.
Did you feel lost?
And we were inside of a building, a wooden building, and we had to get up, and we never really had hot water to shave from. And in those days, you had double-edged safety razors, and which is pretty tough to try and shave and get something
in
out
cold
weather. And the food was terrible. And this is something you learn when you get in the service and go through all this.
You feel a little lonesome being down that far away from home?
Not for me.
No?
No, I think because of the way I was brought up, the family is more or less like a broken family, my dad was never a good provider, and during the Depression days, I think a lot of people had a tough time during Depression days.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people in here where I live. They don't really know what hard times are.
Yeah.
Some of them had it pretty good during the Depression. But I can remember lining up in welfare lines when I was a kid, and you had scratchy woolen underwear, and like I say, all you had was wool, cotton, or silk. And it was bitterly cold, and never had much coal in the house to keep the furnace going. And we used to have steam radiators, if you can remember, back in those days. And I can remember being as a child, we'd be pressing our backs across those steam radiators, just trying to keep warm, because we kind of had to ration out the coal, to keep heat. You didn't waste it. And I'm sure, like myself and a lot of other people, did the same thing, walked along the railroad tracks and picked up whatever coal you could find and bring home, And you never had the money, and especially going into welfare.
Used to pick up wood too.
Whatever you could find.
Parts of 2x4s. I can remember, I'm not far from the railroad tracks, and when I was young, we used to, all kinds of stuff that you could pick up that would burn.
There was a street behind us made out of wooden blocks. And when they decided to pave that street, they took up all these wooden blocks that were in creosote, if you know what that is. And then people grabbed a lot of those wooden blocks and took them home and used them in the furnaces, which really ruined the furnaces because that creosote was so hot, it would crack the inner manifold inside the furnace, and that was no good either. So they finally learned that way.
You remember how long you were at boot?
Basic training was 13 weeks for the Army. For us, it was 17 weeks. And after 17 weeks, we went down to parachute training in Fort Benning.
Now, the paratroopers, was that a selection you made, or that where they stuck you?
No, there was a selection that we picked as a volunteer. You couldn't get into paratroops. You had to volunteer for it. And not only that, at that time, they wanted people to be at least 5 feet 10, 175 pounds. I was a 126-pound weakling. And when I went to Fort Custer, the induction of Fort Custer up here in Michigan, I stayed up there for about a month and a half, I think, or something like that. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting shipped out. And one of the guys in the barracks said, one of the fellows, "Yeah, how come you're not shipping Hallo out of here?" He said, "Well, he wants a paratroops and he's too small. Every time we send a small guy down there, he fails." He said, "For Christ's sake, send the guy down there, let him go. He wants it bad enough. Let him get out of here and go." So they finally put me on a train and let me go down there to go and get into the parachute, basic training. And as we went through there, we had to go through a physical. You had to take off all your clothes, and there were some certain stations that you went through, like they checked your arms and your, and everything like that, and like that. You had to take a color blinding test to see if you're colorblind. If you're colorblind, you weren't able to get in the paratroops. And at the last stage was if you're flat-footed, they would kick you out. I was flat-footed, and I heard about that. I walked around like I was bow-legged and just walked on the outside of my feet. When I got to the last stage, I lifted up my feet. You could see the dirt on the outer edge. She said, "Okay, go through, get out of here."
Real tough test,
Yeah, when you want something bad enough.
Yeah.
So we got into basic training. There was a rope about, I'd say 2 or 3 inches big around, and it was 30 feet high, and if you couldn't climb that over hand, you'd fail after through basic training. And boy, I worked on that rope every single night, I'll tell you what, because I was just a 126-pound weakling. I wanted to paratroop real bad. I wasn't worried about jumping out of an airplane. That's how bad I wanted it. If I could just get through
What
basic.
made you hook on to paratroopers?
It was something new, it was something different. I didn't want the Marines, I didn't want the Army, didn't want the Navy and any part of that. I wanted something different. So when we went through and finally got down into parachute training in Fort Benning, I think there was 186,000 people that went through, made jumps before we got into down there. There was only 3 people killed out of that before we got into it. And the only reason why they got killed was they dropped them out too quick, and the planes up behind them, kind of went into their chutes, ran into their chutes. And actually, it was pretty safe for that particular time to be no problem jumping. You had to pack your own chute the first 5 jumps, and there would be somebody helping you.
Wow.
And you'd help him, and that's how you got your wings. The first 5 jumps you made, then you got your wings. And
what did it feel like to jump out?
It's one of the biggest and the best.
Pretty exhilarating.
You can't explain it. It's one of the biggest thrill you could ever get. Exhilarating. It was really nice to come down floating and it was just something so you can't explain it. It's something really nice.
Landing kind of a jolt?
Well, landing, you fell 16 to 20 feet per second, and no matter how heavy you are, because there's an opening on top of that parachute that it went in and out, and you always oscillated back and forth. And the kind of parachutes we had in those days, you couldn't steer them like the ones you have today. And if you were coming in backwards, you had to try to get up there and twist. You couldn't twist, just kind of try to pull as hard as you could. And if you're oscillating backwards, then they try to tell you that before you land, you want to land and collapse your feet right away and roll. And if you're going to hit a brick wall, that's something else. But when we first went through our basic training, it was all big wide open fields. And,
So you didn't have to worry about trees and,
not worrying about, if you made a tree landing like they did on maneuvers, you had to cross your feet when you're coming down. So, I think on my 7th jump, the planes didn't have us as high as they were supposed to have, and they turned on the green light for us to jump out of the airplane. My chute just opened up and my foot touched the ground. Because you're supposed to be at least
Ooh.
600 feet high, and these pilots should have known that. Some of them put the light on too soon.
they lose anybody from that?
There was only one fellow they did lose because their helmet had a little hook that would clasp underneath that hole underneath there. And as you went out the door of the airplane, you were supposed to grab a hold of your reserve chute and put your arms around it and hold your head down, because as you went out the airplane, the propeller was up here. You were supposed to hold your head down, and that chute came out. It was hooked onto a static line, a steel cable in the line that would pull that little tiny chute out of your backpack.
Right.
And as you went out, that chute would go over your head as you went out, if you didn't hold your head up. So one of those lines that was a little thicker line, it was 450 pounds tensile strength before you could break. If you didn't, one of those lines went around one of our boys' necks and broke his neck. And if you just don't do as they tell you to, that's what you learn when you go through school.
So your original chute was activated by jumping,
By jumping
and the cable,
pulled it up.
but the secondary chute, you probably had to activate.
When you jumped out of the airplane and you felt a certain jerk, you're supposed to look up and see if your chute is open. If it isn't, then you use and your first 5 jumps, you were 1,500 feet up in the air.
That gave you an awful lot of time.
Gave you an awful lot of time. And some of the people were so, I don't want to say afraid, but some of them automatically pulled the reserve chute at the same time when they went out the airplane. So you had two chutes coming down, and which is kind of awkward. But
Was there an advantage to being as small as you were?
not really, because you came down as fast as the other person did. 16 to 20 feet per second, no matter how heavy you are, you will still come down a certain amount of speed.
Do you have a hard time breathing when the wind is blowing by?
No way, no way, no way. No, no problem at all. You do have to use some common sense though. If it's a real windy day and you land on the ground, that chute's gonna pull you along the field.
Yeah.
And if you don't use some common sense and start pulling on that bottom bunch of line,
That
and
helps you
collapse
collapse
that
the
chute.
chute?
Yeah, a lot of people can't think of that, they don't think of that. See?
Because the chute, when you hit, is probably full of air.
They're full of air, right?
And pulling that
Right.
bottom helps you
If there's
collapse.
no wind, it will just automatically collapse anyway.
Yeah.
And then you want to get out of your chute as quick as you can. In combat, it's a little different.
So what other activities in boot did you participate in? A lot of marching and,
Not really, only on, every outfit had to go through 2 weeks of maneuvers, and they would fly up to Tennessee, where they had a lot of trees and everything, and hills, and that would be your maneuvers. And that's where you would learn how, and you would be in different teams, and certain people were labeled, certain teams were enemies and certain teams were not. And you had to try and capture them before they captured you.
they wear a
And
band on their arm to
certain band,
distinguish.
right, and you could tell. And like one of our
Red
officers says,
bands were the bad guys. and-
one of our officers would say, no matter what happened, he said, just beat the hell out of these guys. Don't let them get you. Yeah, a lot of fellas got
Well, there's
lost.
a lot of pride.
A lot of fellas got lost in the woods, and there was, those people down in Tennessee really knew how to cook chicken. They would get lost in the woods and end up with the families and stay there and have chicken with them.
So you're right in Hillbilly Town, eh?
Yeah, that's right, and everybody enjoyed and had a good time. Then at that time, when you finally become a regiment, you'd be shipped up to a certain camp. And you had other people training as paratroopers, and they would be up there. When they had, then they would put certain groups of people together, and that's how a division would be formed. They would three parachute outfits into a division. The gliders were the same way. They would have two.
Oh, they were introduced, the gliders?
They were-
This is where most of your stuff came, didn't it?
The gliders were like cardboard boxes.
Yeah.
Something you wouldn't want to be in.
No, that's
And
not
they
pretty.
had glider pilots that would train when they were pulled behind a plane. And of course, they always came in a little bit later
Yeah,
during the invasion. And never went in on the first wave.
yeah, I've seen some of those gliders there. You actually flew in this? Yeah,
And of course, in a glider, there were a lot of gliders that went in the ground head first.
yeah,
There was no way you could get out. If they had jeeps inside there that were not really securely anchored and tied, if they broke loose, you went in head first and everybody was lost. And they did lose a lot of gliders in Holland especially, and went in head first. And
some of them went through the
and a lot of
woods.
them came, the enemy knew about gliders, and they would dig a big hole and then have a big a dirt wall in front of it. If a glider came in this way, he would crash right into the end of that wall and that mud and everything else, and there was no way for them to get out of it, and they would still get hurt and possibly killed. Or
Some of them ended up in the woods, which it's hard to
they,
try to survive that.
they did lose a lot of people.
All right, you mentioned you learn how to shoot a gun, so that must have been part of your,
Training, basic training, anyone could shoot a gun, but doesn't mean you're gonna hit a target, even though you're looking at it. They try to get you to squeeze the trigger, don't just pull the trigger back, and squeeze the trigger slowly, and while you're aiming, and when you shoot that, and every time it would, they have a target down there, it shows where your bullet went. And if it was always on one side, you had a chance to adjust that sight on your rifle. And I kept my rifle all the way through combat. A lot of people didn't. They lost their rifle, dropped them, something, grabbed another rifle. It was never zeroed in. Mine was zeroed, I knew how to shoot it, and it came in.
what was it, a Springfield?
And mine was an M1.
Oh, really?
M1 Gerard. We only, what do they call it, the bolt action, what they have with the Springfield, they only had, say, one or two of those in each company. Because most of them were either carbines or M1,
Yeah.
right? M1s are 9 pounds. Some of the fellas that had a chance to carry a carbine because they're real light, a smaller gun, but not as accurate. And mine proved to be very accurate in combat, believe me, because I kept that gun all the way through and held onto it. And if you didn't, when you shoot, it's not going to be as accurate. You're not going to hit a target like you think you are. I know I've seen an enemy aim at one of our soldiers one time. Right away, I picked my gun up, and you never know who you're going to kill, even if you killed anybody. But I did shoot, and I seen this guy fall forward because he was aiming at one of our soldiers. And like I hear stories, like General McAuliffe had mentioned at one of our reunions that he talked to one guy in F Company that he shot there and killed 32 men. What do you do, go out and count bodies?
Yeah.
You don't do that. I mean, you talk about stretching stories. It's no way. But like in the Battle of the Bulge, very fortunate. The only person to be alive now that first contacted the enemy for the 101st Airborne Division in the Battle of the Bulge. And they were only 10 yards in front of us and didn't know it. And it was in the middle of the night. And you could hear them moaning in the grass and everything else. We slaughtered them. Slaughtered the enemy at that time. And word was sent back that, where the enemy was and where we were. And that's how they got a picture of what was going on.
So what was your first assignment out of boot camp? Where did they send you?
It wasn't really an assignment. We were trained as companies. We went on hikes maybe for a couple of days or something like that and come back. Just sort of maneuvers like. There was no really assignment. We were trained as a company and not really.
Well, when did they send you overseas?
1 year later.
1 year, wow.
1 year later, we were sent up to a place called Taunton, Massachusetts, and we were in a lot on pass. And some of the people in our outfit went out of New York, and we were all put on ships. Like each regiment, the ships that we put on only held 2,500 people, so it held one regiment. So the ship wasn't as big as some of these other ships.
Are they troop ships?
They call them troop ships, and
Okay.
like the one George Koskomaki was on, who wrote those 3 books for the division. The D-Day was the Screaming Eagles, and Hell's Highway, like Market Garden, and the Battered Bastards of Bastogne, which is the Battle of the Bulge. He was a communication man for the general. So everything that came through his radio, he got before the general got it, and he would give it to the general. And every day he was in combat, he wrote a diary. So he just a little bit of something that would spark his mind to what went on that particular day. And when he came home, he started writing these books and getting stories.
Where did
from
they ship
different
you
men.
to when they shipped you out?
So we went to Massachusetts, and from there we flew over to England. And
Did you get seasick?
I got seasick the very, it was in the middle of January when we left, which is the worst time of the year in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes,
And
particularly up in Massachusetts.
and the bunk that I was in the brig, which is right down here where my little finger is, at the very bottom of the boat. And we were packed in there like sardines. And when that ship went down, and the waves was high as the Empire State Building, you could see that up there, you were sick. You just wanted to die right then and there. Because
It's the worst feeling in the world.
worst feeling in the world. And especially when you're in the bottom part of that ship, and at the very beginning. If you're in the middle of the ship, it's a little different. You kind of roll, you know? Or in the back.
Oh, I'm getting seasick
Yeah,
already.
really, see. But at the front end, you're going down and down and
Yeah.
up. And they tell you, don't drink like liquids. You know, they don't tell you that, but if you're in
Soda
the Navy,
crackers,
you want to eat something solid.
soda crackers.
Yeah, whatever. And talk about wanting to die right then and there. It was terrible. Took us 11 days. Not like George Koskomaki, he was on a big ship. The keel got damaged. They went up to Newfoundland, and it took them 31 days to get over there. We went over in 11 days. And we got stationed about 70 miles west of London in a little tiny village. And one of the other regiments got stationed about 12 miles away. And another regiment got stationed in a bigger city, which was back with the commanding general of the division.
Now, this was before D-Day?
Before D-Day. And that was in January, and in
43?
and in June, the invasions. 6 months, we were there for 6 months,
Okay, so that was 44
44,
when you got to England.
right.
So, how did you participate? Did you participate in the invasion?
We didn't know when the invasion was starting.
Yeah.
We heard rumors. And,
Well, they didn't know until the day they went.
and we had 3 night jumps in England.
Yeah,
And the air is a little different in England. So this last night jump, and if you could see a cigarette light down in the bottom, it's because every time we came down in the parachutes we had, you always oscillated. And if your wind blew you, you were blowing backwards, You don't know if you're gonna come on top of a picket fence, and, or a tree landing, or if you're gonna hit the side of a wall. It was just black. There was not one speck of light whatsoever. So you just didn't know when you were gonna hit that ground. And when we landed, there was over 350 of us that came down and had broken bones. And there was a lot of people with broken bones. A lot of them were hospitalized, I don't know how many months. Now let me back up a little bit. Just before this invasion started in England, before we had this night jump, we were laying around in England, and we were in Quonset huts, if you know what they were. And some people were in horse stables, in little brick buildings where the horses stayed. And we used to pass the time away playing six-man touch football or something like that. And I was walking through the company area one day, and this guy hollers out, "Hey, Hallo, come on over here and give us a hand. We need a hand over there, somebody to help us play touch football." And he says, "Now I want you to center me the ball because I'm going to run right through that guy." We had three guys on each side. And this guy's name was Jack Warden. Did you ever hear of a movie star called Jack Warden? Well, he was in my company. And he was hurt so bad, he was in the hospital, he never did see combat. They sent so many people home. And everybody was screaming medic that night when we landed in the pier, and we didn't know where we were. And I think I was the last guy to be picked up that next day. And they picked me up, and I think it took me about, it was dark before they got me back to my camp. And instead of taking me to the hospital right away, because that night when I landed, my leg broke just like a matchstick. I could feel it. Oh. And I stood up and I could feel the bone snapping back and forth, so I just laid down, and everybody's screaming medic, and I couldn't compete with these guys, so I just laid down and pulled my reserve shirt open and covered myself up for the night. And next morning I got up, everything was quiet and everybody was gone, and I'm still up there on the top of a hill. And they finally picked me up and took me back to my company area instead of taking me to the hospital. I didn't get in the hospital till the following day. So when I took my shoe off, my foot really swelled up, and all you could see was the tips of my toes. And I was really in pain. And that's when I put a cast on my leg. And that's when we found out that the invasion started 4 days after we broke our bones. They went to the hospital trying to get all the people that could walk for the invasion. And the other people who were in the hospital, really bad broken bones, they sent them home. They never saw combat. And they needed somebody back there to watch the equipment in England, and I had a cast on my leg. So I was one of the fellows that was kept back there to watch the equipment in England. And while I was on guard duty back there, that's when I met my wife.
Really? Huh. Yeah. What was she doing there?
Well, she was in a nearby town training as be a hairdresser.
Right.
And she lived in this little village with her sister and her aunt. And this little village where we were stationed. And I just met her by accident. And I heard there was a couple other guys around.
How did you meet her?
Well, she was riding around on her bicycle, and I said to the one girl, I said, "Who is that?" She said, "Well, she's my sister." I said, "Well, I'd like to meet her." And we finally met. And I heard there was a couple other guys that wanted to marry her too. So I knew her for about 3 weeks.
So you had a little competition?
Well, I wouldn't say it was competition. I said I just knew her for about 3 weeks. And I told her, I says, we're going to get married. I'm going to come back after the war. We're going to get married. But it took me a whole year before I got back to her. And when I got shipped over to France and went through all the rest of it without a scratch, and wrote letters back and forth, and she waited for me.
Well, I'll be darned.
And I ended up with malnutrition through the Battle of the Bulge and everything, and went through everything. But I managed to go through the rest of it without a scratch.
What was your role during the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, before that, there was Holland. I'd have to back up. And before we left for Holland, because there were so many pilots that got lost dropping these men in Normandy, and way out of whack, they didn't know whether there were green pilots. And as if you read George Koskomecki's book, one of the pilots took the whole sick that he had back to England, didn't even drop the men he had in the plane, and took them all back to England. And then one of the guys in my platoon I was playing tough football against, they were going back over the water, and the guy turned on the green light for him to jump. He said, "Wait a minute, what's going on?" And the pilot said, "We're lost, we're going back to England." I said, "You turn this plane around and get us over land and drop us somewhere, but get us back to land." And they had to turn around and drop them back, because they didn't know where they were. So companies were scattered anywhere from 10 to 30 miles apart. And there were Germans between them, Germans outside of them and all that. So they were scattered all over, and a lot of them had to surrender and didn't know what was going on.
During the time you were in the paratroopers, did the paratrooper facilities and equipment improve?
Oh, not the equipment so much. In Holland, the parachute did improve. Nylon came out,
Yeah,
and how to, they didn't have the snap fasteners
yeah,
like they did before. They just had all the straps coming in one spot. You just have to hit them and turn, give it a turn, and all the straps would fall off, out, and that was one improvement. The other improvement was going to Holland. General Eisenhower and Winston Churchill was 15 yards away from us in the middle of the night and gave us a little speech. And he said, "To you pilots, I want you to take these boys where they're supposed to go and come back and salute your officer, commanding officer, and tell them that, 'Sir, I have accomplished my mission.' And take these boys where they were supposed to be dropped." And going over to Holland, you flew over the water low, so the radar wouldn't get you. And when you got to land, you were supposed to go up to 600 feet, and then drop your boys at a certain spot where they were supposed to be dropped. And going to Holland, since I had a broken leg, I take my leg up all the way from the ankle all the way up to my knee, because not knowing what kind of land that I'm going to land on. I was fortunate. It was a beautiful sunshiny day, and landing wide open, and the plane, a few planes that we were in, we got lost, the pilots, and instead of dropping on the target that we were supposed to drop on, we were dropped a few miles away around the castle. And let me back up again. If you saw the movie called The Longest Day, there was a chaplain that landed in the stream in that movie called The Longest Day. They portrayed that as the English chaplain. Well, actually, that was my chaplain in the 501st Parachute Infantry. His name was Father Sampson. And the few planes that got lost over in Holland, and there was one chaplain landed in the moat around the castle, and who was that chaplain? I mean, who was that person? The same chaplain that landed in the stream that was in The Longest Day. And he wrote a little book called Look Out Below. He said, if they were to take me out in the middle of the Sahara Desert and drop me, I'd probably land on some camel dung. So that was Father Sampson, but that was our chaplain. And a wonderful person who later in life helped people how to get into Notre Dame and go to college. And he stayed out through the whole duration. He was captured in the Battle of the Bulge, and when the enemy found out that he was a priest, they offered to let him go, and he said, "No, I think these people in prison would
probably need
enjoy my services more." So he stayed a prisoner of war in the Battle of the Bulge, and stayed with the boys. And so when we went to Holland, we learned more about flying over, and not only that, flying over the channel. A lot of us took our gas mask off and threw it out in the channel. We took the shovel that was heavy, threw that over in the channel. The mesquite made a lot of noise. I threw that in the channel. The only thing I kept was a toothbrush. If I'm going to be behind enemy lines, and I got to travel fast, I want to be able as light as I can. I'm not going to be carrying all this heavy equipment making noise. And a lot of us did that. And if I'd known we were going to be dropped that low in Holland, I would have taken a reserve chute and dropped that, because it wouldn't have been any good. We weren't high enough to use it. So that's what happened in Holland. We had a little more experience and knew what to do. And and use common sense.
Now, once you're dropped on the target, you become an infantryman?
That's right, you become an infantryman.
So the paratroopers were just a way to get you where you needed to go?
Absolutely, right. The idea is to get together in a group.
Right.
And be together. And lots of times it never happened that way. If you were away, you would have to try to link up and get to your forces to who you belong to.
In thinking back, how do you feel about the Battle of the Bulge? Was that something that bothered you or scared you, or?
Never bothered me a bit. Going through the Holland situation, which was a one-day operation that we had, we were there for 72 days because the British kind of got screwed up in a way because they had lost all communication, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to, how to react or whatever it was. We had our objective. We were to keep a certain road open all the way up to Arnhem, which we did. And we accomplished what we did, but we had to stay there because of the British. And after that happened and the British finally did get up there, and the British Holland was over with, we went back, and a lot of people went on pass back in France, the Mormon France where we were stationed, in the old World War I trenches. The lay of the land, you can see that, and not too far from Reims, France, and not too far from Paris. A lot of people went on pass. The commanding general was back in the States for some either mission or other, and a lot of us just wanted rest when we got back from the 72 days and try to clean ourselves up and delouse ourselves. And as we were doing that, we were woken up in the middle of the night, and the 19th of December, which was all of a sudden became cold, and they told us to put a heavy coat on, grab your rifle, and jump on a truck. We didn't know what was going on. They just told us to get on a truck. That was all there was to it. And we went for a long ride, and the ride we went to was in the Battle of the Bulge. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew what was happening. And a lot of people were still on pass. The general was caught in the States, and we went into the Battle of the Bulge with the assistant commanding general. And as we had to feel our way around to see what was happening, and as it was, yours truly here was in the 501. We happened to make the first contact in the Battle of the Bulge in the middle of the night. There still wasn't snow on the ground because it's December the 19th, and 2 days later is when the snow started coming. But it was awful cold that night and freezing, riding on that truck on that long trek going to Belgium, and still not knowing what your job was or what you were to. Everybody was sent out to a certain area and said stay there. It just happened to be the enemy came where we were, and we heard a bunch of noise in the middle of the night, and the Germans like to holler and laugh and talk out loud in the middle of the night like nothing would bother them. Like they ran through 9 countries the first year when they went to war, and so nothing was going to stop them. Well, when they coming towards us, it was so foggy that night we couldn't see, say about from here to maybe that corner, and the fog was so thick you just couldn't see. You could just hear their voices. And we had this one squad on one side of the railroad, a spur of a railroad track that went through the woods. It's not there anymore. The whole company and all the officers were on the other side of the railroad track. And we were in these woods, and we happened to be at the edge of the woods before the Germans came here. So we all grabbed a tree, this one squad. And as they were getting close, they said, don't fire until they give them a signal. Well, we didn't know what the signal was. I just said, play it by ear. My machine gun section had the first tree by the railroad track. I had the second. My little mascot had the carbine on my left. He had a grenade on the end of his carbine. And we waited and waited. And as they got closer and closer, all of a sudden we could see the dew on the shape of the helmets of these Germans, the shape of the helmets. And they were about 10 yards in front of us. And my little mascot says, I'm not waiting any longer. And he says that as he said that, we all fired about the same time. As soon as he fired, we all did. But the company didn't realize that all the Germans were on our side of the track where their one squad was, and they didn't know what was going on, because the railroad was always a few feet higher than the ground level. And as I say, you could hear them moaning. So word was sent back that A Company had contacted the enemy and where we were. Then they pulled back, and later on during the night, some other outfit had called back and said they contacted the enemy. And then they began to find out that we were slowly being surrounded by the enemy in the Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge.
How did you get out of that?
We just hung around there and just stayed and took care of our position. And as the snow came, I said, "You're out." Some people were near some buildings or something. Some people were near some houses, but not A Company. We were out there in the woods all the way. In 24 hours around the clock, you couldn't build a fire because they knew where you were. So we just had to just stand the cold. And you more or less had to get acclimatized to it. And I always told the guys, keep moving, don't sit still. Whatever you do, don't go to sleep. You're not going to wake up unless you have somebody with you. And just keep moving around a little bit. And I think a mistake was a lot of people took their shoes off and whatever, they might have gotten wet or something like that, and which was a big mistake.
Yeah.
And we were out in that bitter cold, and a lot of other people had a chance to maybe be warmer. And you live, like I say, try to find a place that's low on the ground and do the best you can. And that's all you could do. And the Germans had what they called concussion grenades. They would bury in the snow and tie them to a tree. And I don't know what they looked like. I stepped on one myself. I looked down to see if I still had legs on, because an explosion went,
Yeah.
but you were numb, you know. You didn't know what it was, and that's what it was, a concussion grenade, what they call them. Didn't know damage, but maybe your ears a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's how we survived in the Battle of the Bulge. If you they have a CD or DVD out, and I have one in the bedroom back there that I bought off of PBS. My daughter got it for me, called The Battle of the Bulge, narrated by Dave C. McCullough, which is the secretary, he was a general, to the commanding general of the whole front of the Battle of the Bulge. And it was explaining everything what went on in the Battle of the Bulge. Because we weren't there, we weren't the first ones up there, because there was a brand new infantry division, the 106th Infantry Division, that was up there before we were. The Germans were moving so fast, they bypassed Bastogne, the city that we were in, and just kept on going, and then kind of took over this whole new infantry division that was up there, and they had to surrender most of the general called down, said he had to surrender most of his men because they had no ammunition and food and stuff like that, which he did. And then they decided to come back and take this little city over where we had snuck in the middle of the night, and decided to take our city, and only to find out that we were there.
Mm-hmm.
And that became a different story.
Where did you end up going after Bastogne?
We, in Bastogne, it was getting, I'm going to say, maybe the war was kind of changing tides, and the commander I had in Bastogne, he was a lousy commander to begin with, because he was a brand new officer. We had all new officers going into Holland, because we lost all our officers in Normandy except one, and two really, and they didn't know how to give orders or anything, and this one officer that was in command of us in the Battle of the Bulge, he had one brother that was killed over in the islands, so his wife at home decided that she wants her husband home. He was the only child left in the family, so he had to go home whether he liked it or not, and they sent up another officer from headquarters company to take our company over, and he was instantly killed by one of our own men, because we had ordnance inspection. It was a mistake that happened, and they call it friendly fire. And they brought down another officer, so we had 3 officers in one day, company commanders. And the young guy that took over our company, he was a little 22-year-old pipsqueak. He was pretty sharp, pretty smart, and his dad ran a newspaper back home, which gave him an awful lot of publicity. Every time this guy turned around, he had a medal. I got him. And he got wrote up in Holland. It was called the Incredible Patrol that he did in Holland, and where they went out and captured 29 prisoners and brought them back. And he got a big write-up in Life magazine, and his dad also had a big write-up back home, publicity. And I was in one of the rubber boats that helped brought these prisoners back across the river that in Holland that they had captured. So he ends up as my company commander, and after Bastogne, he took over our company, and we went through Luxembourg, down into Alsace-Lorraine, and got attached to General Pat's 7th Army Division, and to his outfit, and still snow on the ground, and they said that General Patch couldn't make a move on a certain end of his troops up there. They wanted somebody down at our end to create a lot of noise and make a big racket to bring the enemy down towards us so he could make a move. And at this time, from Normandy, 72 days in Holland, 23 days, I'm guessing in Battle of the Bulge. There were no promotions made in my company. The officers we had, they had them acting as non-coms. And the first mistake he did when he did take over our company in Holland, one platoon went AWOL because he went and took a replacement, a new man, and made him a first sergeant command over our company, which is a no-no. He should have taken one of the boys that got trained in Toccoa, one of the old-timers, and made him a first sergeant. But he didn't do that, and that's a no-no. You don't take a new man and put him in charge of some regular guys as are veterans, and that was a big mistake, and he didn't know how to give orders, it was terrible. So anyway, he finally had to go home, and as I say, we went down through Alsace-Lorraine and had this thing where a company got called on again, like we did in Holland, had to go up and save a company because the company that we went up to save that was in Holland, pinned against a dike. We were known as this. Every time this company commander got pinned against and got cornered, he'd always call back for help. And A company was always called to go and help. And when we lost 2/3 of our men in Holland in one little town, and lost 5 more through a sniper to help his company that was cornered up and then to dike there. This company commander that I was his operations sergeant. I used to go down and fight with the 3rd platoon. They didn't need me in the company anymore, and I'd fight with them. And he'd say he didn't know the names of all the guys in the outfit. He'd say, "Tell Hallo to go out there in the open and dig a foxhole and find out where a sniper is." And he said, "Tell the platoon sergeant to do the same thing." And I said, and I told the officer, "Is he nuts? There's a sniper out there, and he wants to go out there and dig a foxhole in the open. Is he nuts? You don't do that. He's crazy." The platoon sergeant did that. He should have known better. Took one of our original boys out there, and one shot rang out, and he was killed. And the officer, he didn't know what to do, what kind of orders to give. So anyhow, as we ended up down in Alsace-Lorraine, we were given a mission to try and bring the enemy down towards our neck of the woods, and they came down with trench coats that were outer green on the outside and white on the inside. We had about 44 men left in the company. We reversed the coats and put the coats on. My company commander would send out some patrols at night and try to find a place where the company could go and cross somewhere where nobody would get hurt and nobody's enemy is there, and see what we could find on our own. and maybe we can create a big racket and noise and all that, bring the enemy down where we were. And that's what he did. And he said, if anybody gets hurt on this mission, they'll have to get back on their own. And we went along with them, and we started in the middle of the night. We started running, and we ran and ran, and we came across a little blacktop road that was, in the distance, we could hear the soldiers coming down towards us in platoon formation, marching. And off the edge of the roads, it was very steep, and we passed the word around to tell everybody to flop yourself right in the snow and don't move. Here's where it really becomes exhilarating. As these guys are coming down the road there, as they're coming by, there's a wait until they get to the middle of us. I could say you could reach over the top of the road and trip these guys as they were walking by. They didn't even know we were there. We just happened to hit that spot before they didn't see us running across. It's still a wooded area and things like that, sparsely. And as they got in the middle of us, we just kind of slaughtered all of them and made a lot of noise and shot and gun and everything else, and ran back into the battalion CP, command post, and they pinned another medal on my little company commander, whose dad ran a newspaper back home, and got all the publicity. And he turned around and he says, Hallo, I don't know how to have done without you trying to hold this company together, but this won't get you the Silver Star. What am I supposed to do? Stand there like a dummy? And so I never did get it. Which I would have liked the Silver Star.
He said he was going to give you the Silver Star.
No, he said this won't get you the Silver Star.
Oh.
This won't get you, but he got one. He got another one. Every
Is
time
that when you got the Bronze Star?
The only time we got the Bronze Star was when the division was sent home. And everybody was sent home. Eisenhower said, give every man enlisted man, every man a Bronze Star in the division. That's how they got it. Some people already had Bronze Star, so they got another one. So what happened? But I didn't come home with my outfit at that particular time because the war was ending, and I was called up to battalion headquarters. My company commander said to me, he said, Hallo, they want a new guy to take over battalion operations. And I said, well, tell them I'm not interested. I'm not going to leave my company now. I've been with these boys since I started in Toccoa. And we've had replacements all along the way. There's only so many of us original boys left. I said, I'm not leaving these guys. We've had about 3 different first sergeants and along the way and everything. So anyway, I didn't think he would call me up there anyway, but he did call me. And he said, you're going to be my next takeover battalion operator. I said, no, I'm not. And that room was filled of personnel clerks at different companies. And I said, you're probably a replacement yourself. I'm kind of bitter at this stage. And I said, I want to stay with my boys. I've been with them ever since I left Toccoa. I'm not going to leave my company now. I should have taken the job. He said, I'm going to give you, I would have ended up with another couple of stripes on mine. But no, I didn't. They gave it to somebody else, and I went back to my company. So one of the personnel clerks came up there, and he knew my wife. In the meantime, I had gotten married, along the way, and he said, Ed, they got a program going over here called the Information Education Program. The government's putting out, you can go to any college you want to in England for 3 months, and this way you can visit your wife on weekends. I said, great. He said, what college you want to go to? And all of a sudden I drew a blank. I wasn't thinking of Oxford, I wasn't thinking of Cambridge or any of those famous colleges. I couldn't think of a college to go to. And especially Oxford wasn't that far away from where she was living. No, I had to pick a place way up north called King's College in Durham, and then I had to take a train on weekends to come down to visit her and then go back. And so I was with my wife for 3 extra months there, and I went to college.
So you were there when the war ended?
I was there when the war ended. And before the war ended, before it came, it was ending fast. The 501st, we were all down in Birch's Garden. And the 501st was taken out of the division and sent all the way back to Marmelon, France, where the old World War I trenches were, and on a special mission. Nobody knew what it was at the time. And out of the 17th Airborne, there was another regiment taken out of that and pulled back and do the same thing that we were going to do. Well, I found out what they were going to do was train us, and they were going to fly us in on Germany and on the prison camps and try to free the prisoners because they were afraid they were going to kill our prisoners. And they called this the Armageddon of the 501. And in Holland, the colonel that was in charge of the 501 was killed by a sniper. And we had an assistant colonel that had taken over his regiment. Well, at this particular time, they didn't need 3 parachute officers, so instead of trying to get replacement from somewhere, they would break up the 501st Infantry Regiment and ship them out to different parts of the division. The artillery, the gliders, the wherever, and maybe the 506 and the 502, and that's where we went. And I got shipped to the 506, and that's where I got discharged under the 506. And since the war was ending quickly at that time. At that particular time, our mission got called off. We didn't have to fly in on a prison camp because the Russians were moving so fast, they freed the prisoners. We didn't have to go, thank God. And then the war, everybody was being sent home. The 101st, and they brought other troops over to,
You didn't have to stay.
Didn't have to stay, no. I came home alone because when I finished those 3 months in college, I rode home on a small aircraft carrier that the British had borrowed, and they were returning it to the States, and they didn't need it anymore, and every morning at about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, they'd bring out this wooden horse, and on top of it they would set a little keg full of rum, and us boys were sitting there. We never got a taste of that rum, but the British did. They did that every morning.
Was it better riding on the aircraft carrier than it was on the troop ship?
Well, in those days, there was the aircraft carrier. All the ships were small, not like they are today, where they hold 5,000 people. It's really something. So anyway, the war ended and came home, and I was supposed to get my job back with the Ford Motor Company. There were no unions in those days. And I walked in and they put me on the dirtiest, filthiest job, grinding housings for Ferguson tractors. Ford at that time was making Ferguson tractors for Ferguson and in his plants. And I said, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get my job back. I'm supposed to be a tool grinder. Well, no, you weren't. When you hear you were under the government, the government's not here anymore. I said, well, put me in a tool room. Well, we can't do that. That's for the people who's already there. And again, like I said, they came to the dirtiest job. We had 3 wildcat strikes in 1 month. The third wildcat strike we had, I walked straight out and never looked back, and I went into construction. Started working in the construction. I went in as a tar and gravel roofer, putting mopping felt and insulation stuffs on new buildings, and I put the roof on that new city hall downtown. Did all kinds of jobs all around, and in construction. The only thing is, you couldn't use hot tar and mop hot tar. It had to be a dry day. So it was a seasonal job. In the wintertime or rain, you never worked. And so I had to give myself a steady job somewhere along the line, and I finally got myself a job as a part-time butcher, and I ended up being a full-time butcher for A&P. My wife came over here 2 years later. It took her that long, and she had to sign a paper that if she became a public menace or something like that in those days, she'd be automatically deported. Well, immigration has changed. You can see that over the years. So we ended up with 8 children and 18 grandchildren and 9 great children.
Wow.
and a wonderful family, and she passed away 12 years ago. And her problem was food. She was 96 pounds when I met her, but her great-grandmother was a diabetic, her grandmother was a diabetic, her mother was a diabetic, so she became a diabetic. And she had a grocery bag full of pills that she had to take, and it was tough. And a good woman. I'd say she only did one thing wrong in her life, that was listen to me. That was it.
Your Bronze Star you told us about.
The Bronze Star, each Bronze Star that was, I didn't get it right away. You had to, if they missed you, I wrote a letter, and they sent me a Bronze Star, and then behind each Bronze Star is your name in that Bronze Star. It's stenciled right in that name.
Good conduct is just, don't get in trouble.
That's right. I got the conduct, the sharpshooter's badge, and the never got in any trouble in the service or anything like that. I was a good boy.
And you had the other awards, but they were occupational type awards. You were here or there for so many days.
That's right.
What was it like getting back into the States after being away for so long?
To get a job. That was the first worry. I mean, after to get a job. I had moved around so much, especially when my wife came here, and being such a religious person she was, Episcopalian, and I didn't know it, and she didn't say anything at the time, but she took some lessons and became a Roman Catholic, which is practically the same thing. But she did this on her own and didn't say anything to me about it. And with small unemployment checks we got, when I was a roofer, you didn't work all the time. She'd even take out a small check and donate it to the church. And I'd say, my God, you don't get much as it is. Back in those days it was $17, all you got. And but that's a kind of a good soul she was.
When you were discharged, were you given any help financially to?
Our state was, yeah, they gave us $500. And if you wanted to go to college, you had a chance to go to college.
Or buy a house?
You go under the GI Bill. But I wasn't that fortunate. I wanted to go to college, but I had a wife coming over and thinking about supporting the family and all that. I didn't have that much shit going to college. I really wanted to go to college too.
You remember 5220?
The name sounds vaguely familiar, but...
They gave you $20 a week for 52 weeks.
There's a WPA, wasn't it?
Well, I just heard that one time a while back, and every time I talk with a World War II guy, and I would see if he remembers it. That, that was a lot of money at the time.
You leaned on a shovel and didn't have to do a thing, and they would pay you money.
$20 a week.
And we were under the gold standard back in those days. Money went a long ways. $5 would buy you a whole week's full of groceries in those days. I mean, it went a long ways. But I think these fellows in Congress today must have had a different slide rule, and I think it had to be the 70s that we got off the gold standard, and now they can print money. Back in those days, you couldn't print money unless there was gold behind it, and we didn't have that. They had to balance the budget every year. And I think forget about that now. Now they can print money anytime they want to and do whatever they want. We don't, so the value of the money has been cheapened quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the good old days, the gold standard, that was really something.
Were your folks still alive when you came home?
Yes, they were, but the kids that couldn't speak had to be put up into Lapeer, if you know where Lapeer is. And then they didn't know too much about mental retardation in those days. Mm-hmm. And there was also the abuse problem. that went on that you didn't know about. And the best place, I think, in the state today is a place up in Carroll, Michigan, which they did really good for the women were kept separate, the boys were kept separate. The ones that were violent were kept separate away from the other boys. That had to be taken care of. But the people that were overseeing all these people, those are the ones you had to watch out for, because these were the people that abused these people. You didn't know what went on. And I was the only fellow left in the family to take care of my brother and sisters. My mother passed away, and I had a sister that was 5 years older than I was, and she didn't want any part of this. And so once a year, I was always called down for an orientation to what they did for these children and where they lived. And Carroll, Michigan was the best place in Michigan. And the people that would take care of these, come in and take care of these people, made a minimum wage. They didn't make any money, but they would take care of these people and do what they had to do with them. And they were good. They were good. And they were given so much money, a certain amount of money, that was all, in case something happened to them, had to be buried. So I have buried everybody in my family. I'm the only one left.
Your children have passed too?
No, my own children.
Oh.
I'm talking about
Okay.
myself. My sister,
Are your family around in the area?
I have one family that's that lives in Farmington here, and she's my trust. And she's the only one that's near me. So she's the fourth oldest, and so she's the only one closest to me. So she's my trust in case anything happens. She's I had a couple of them out there in California. There was one down in Georgia, Grand Rapids, and I have a boy left up in Newaygo, and so they're scattered around. The one that was in Wisconsin is out in Clarkston now, and so they're all scattered around. But from my own family, my mother and father, I'm the only one left. And we do have some great-grandchildren over there 20 miles from Damascus, and I understand they're okay. But what's going on now with this beheading and this ISIS and everything else is terrible. I'd hate to think what's going on over there. People, and they do this all in the name of God, you know.
Yeah.
You don't do that in the name of God. So no matter what happens, and what people talk about our country, and you look at the United States on a world map, we are just a little tiny country, and we're taking care of the whole world and helping them, and money, and sending everything. And there's something going on. I know for sure we do have an underground network through the Vietnam boys that's going on over there, and the government has sent money that you don't even know about that's helping the underground network. So they may think that our government doesn't know anything, but they do. And this is still the greatest country in the world. No, what people say. I think if a lot of people went over there and seen how people lived, it'd be a different story. But they don't have, get to take one bath a week or something like that there. They don't have the underground plumbing that we have over here. Like my wife's brother, who lives in Cornwall, he had his boy came over here and stayed with us, and he went back home. He said, "Oh my God," he said, "he takes a shower every day over there, you know." And it's something they don't do over there in England. They don't have. So it's we do. We're a land of plenty and waste. That's what we have here. But we do help a lot of people, and we may do a lot of bad. Maybe they don't think that we're doing good or something like that, but because there's a lot of things that we don't know and how to go about it. But it's still the greatest country in the world.
You gave us some pictures to show. I believe this one is when you were 24?
I was 24, and the one there is 89 years old. That's 65 years apart.
So there's,
And when I went across on this tour, I was 94, and before I started the tour, I came down with shingles, which is an awful thing. I had pills and my stomach hurt so bad and the bone, but I had a shingle shot a little over a year earlier, which stopped the itching and the biggest pain part of it, so which helped me through.
here's the official cutting of the ribbon.
If I'd have thought about it at the time when I got discharged, I would have told them I didn't want that discharge under the 506, because I'm still loyal to my old regiment,
Now,
and I'll still stay true to my 501 boys.
do you have a chance to meet with those?
In 1975, I went to a divisional reunion down in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and we had a meeting in the A Company area, and one of the boys that lived in Florida talked to George Koskomaki, who was the secretary for the division at that time, and gave out on the newsletters every bi-monthly, and he tried to give him a list of names. He wanted to start a reunion of ourselves, the 501 only. The division had a reunion every year since the war, and of all the outfits. And if you went to the divisional reunion, you wouldn't know who the other guy was because he was a glider boy, artilleryman, engineers, or something like that. So the 501 decided to have their own reunions and started in 1975. And that way, I think when we started out, we would have it in a different city every year, a different state. And we started out with, say, maybe about 350 people would come to our reunions. And today, we're down to 100 people. 90 of them are grandmothers and widows and grandchildren. The other 10 people that come are World War II veterans. And the grandmothers and the widows, they tell us what to do at our reunions. So we have a good time. We have our hospitality room, all the booze you want to drink, or wine, or pop, or the kids, and we have a nice time in a banquet. And the division always wants the 501 to come to their reunions. They try to tell us what to do, but we found out later in the war that the 502 is the only parachute outfit that's really in the 101st Division. The 501st and the 506 are only attached to the 101st Division. So, but somehow they've kind of linked us right into the 101st. And nowadays you hear so much about the Band of Brothers because they made a movie, The Band of Brothers. And George Koskomaki doesn't like it because that's all you hear about the Band of Brothers. Everybody thinks the Band of Brothers won the war for the 101st Airborne Division, which is a no-no. Because what they did in that, what that company did, every other company did the same thing in combat. And there were so many untold stories, like the one I just told you, that I could reach over the top of the road and trip these soldiers coming by and didn't even know we were there. Stories you don't even hear about, you don't even know. And that are untold. There's a lot of fellas that, like there's one fella that MCs the 501 reunions. He had a stroke here about a year ago. He had married his nurse over there, and they came home, and she still became a nurse after she became home, worked in the emergency room all the time, and she gave him 10 kids. And she's just a little bitty of a gal, and 7 girls and 3 boys. And now she's gone, and he's had a stroke, and he was telling some of his daughters, you know, Eddie should write a book, because he was the guy that was really in it. And I said, oh, come on now, you know, kind of so much stuff I've forgotten, and wouldn't know where to begin. So anyway, this is nice, and what you've done for me, I appreciate it.
Do you want to introduce Karen and Nick?
Yeah, go ahead.
What can I say? Her and her husband's on a tour with us this the 70th anniversary tour that walked across Europe and Holland and Belgium and down into Bavaria. And a lot of walking, talk about all the cemeteries. The first cemetery in France was 171 acres. And Holland, I think, was 160 or 50 acres. And then in Belgium, it was smaller yet. And we did see one German cemetery over there. And the only one that I saw that was taken care of, I've seen one in Bastogne that wasn't taken care of, which is a very sad note. But there are 6 bodies in each grave. The youngest is 16, and the oldest is 65, a German cemetery, which is sad. And I never shot a person in cold blood in my life, especially a German soldier. When I had the chance, we took them as prisoners, and the SS troopers are the only mean ones. Those are the guys I really wanted to. And in Holland, when I had a chance to go out, and I was this company's operations sergeant, I'd go down and help him fight in the 3rd platoon. I swear my name was the only one he knew, my commander. And he said, send him out as a scout in Holland, where that sniper was and all that, and we had another scout go with me. And I thought this was going to be my Armageddon, going out there as a scout. And we did go out as a scout. And before you know it, I ended up in a bunch of weeds out there in the middle of the field. And in the middle of the weeds, there was an SS trooper laying on the ground. And as he was looking at the very flat part of his boot, from the knee on down was completely turned around. The only thing holding the bottom leg together was a piece of skin. His leg was blown apart. And he was begging me to shoot him. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to shoot this guy. He's going to bleed to death. Let him go. And I walked out through the weeds there, and the other scout that I was with, before you know it, 19 Germans gave themselves up to us. And I marched them down to C Company, who we were helping, and dropped the soldiers off to them, and came back to my company area. And it's one of those things you did, and lucky to come out of. Mm-hmm. But only coming back to my company area, there was a guy still in the woods yet. He started shooting at me, and I started running, and he shot at me again, and I started running faster, and I said, I'll give this guy one more shot. I'm bidding it pretty close to my company area, and that thing was so close when he did, and I dove in the company area, and so he decided to throw some more shells into the woods, and then he finally gave up and walked himself down into the company area. Well, that was one of the stories anyway.
Right.
And these 2 people that were with me, we had 41 people on the bus, and I never met such a finer bunch of people. And wherever I went, they kept taking pictures of me, and I said, wait a minute, I'm just a soldier here, for God's sakes, I'm nobody. You know, they said, no, this is all this, that. I felt kind of ridiculous there. I'm just one of the boys, you know. We had a good time wherever we went, and we had a nice time. And they were all great bunch of people, and they're all taking pictures and everything wherever we went, and a great bunch of people.
Great interview.
Any questions?
Very good.
You folks have any?
The only question I had is, you married your wife before the end of the war. Did you have some kind of leave or something and go back and?
No, I never went back. I never went back to England. On our 46th anniversary, her and I went back. She'd been back a few times because I stayed home with the kids and saw her brother and her sister.
Well, I mean, when you actually got married, it was before the war. Before the war was over, were you on a leave?
Only when I went to college.
And so then that's when you married her?
No, I got a chance, when I got transferred into the 506, they gave me a 7-day furlough.
Ah, okay.
And then I had the papers already on file. And so that's when I got married. So I hitched a ride off of a B-17 out of Orly field in Paris. And 3 of us guys bound a ride in that bomber to go into England. And so we laid in the nose of the ship, And as they took off, the pilots were up above us, and one of the fellas, as we took off on this long runway, and they still had propellers in airplanes, you know, and right until the end of the runway, there was a sheer cliff drop. That's when we took off the runway. Well, one of the guys that was with us got sick. He and down there with us. So anyhow, we landed in London and kind of deloused ourselves and got cleaned up in London. I went up, saw my wife, and we got married in Newbury, England, which was in a little town where she was learning how to become a hairdresser, which is 12 miles away from where her aunt lived. And they had the old superstition that you're not supposed to see the bride the night before. So I had to stay in Newbury all night, and she was back home in Lambourne, and she was supposed to come to church the next day, and I was supposed to meet her in church. Well, needless to say, I celebrated a little bit in the pubs, and I came in the back door of the church, and the Canon Green says, "We better give this guy a cup of tea. He looks like he needs it." And waited for my wife to come into church, and we got married. Well, you don't really legally get married in church. It's not legal until the barrister comes in and takes you to a little room below, and he pronounces the words over you. That's when you're legally married in England.
And so you only had a couple of days with her.
We went to London. We had about a week.
Okay.
And that's when the buzz bombs were coming over.
Oh.
And I could tell you some more stories about Holland, but buzz bombs were coming over, and the girl in the restaurant says, "Don't worry about the buzz bombs. It's when you don't hear them, then you
That's why
start
you're
worrying."
worried, if they're falling.
That's what I don't. So we spent a week in London, on the outskirts of London, and then came back home.
And then you had a hitch ride back on another plane?
I went back, yes. Got back to my outfit, and then I got back.
So you were in, when you were in Birch's Garden, you were assigned to the 506 then?
No, I was in Birch Garden, the 501. We didn't get
Yeah,
okay.
it was after that.
We didn't get broken up until after Birch's Garden, and I got attached to the, in France, got attached to the 506. And the officer came out and said, "We're overlaid, loaded with non-coms here. Would you consider taking a break?" Well, I had just made my sergeant stripes after being through all the combat, and that last little officer, the commander I had, he was the only one that came through and promoted people in our company. And I told him, I said, "You're probably a replacement here yourself." And I getting to the point I was bitter about everything, and I said, "I'm not, I waited all these years and all that there, and I finally got my stripes, and you want me to take them away?" I said, "Nobody's taking these stripes away." He said, "No, I'm just asking you." Well, right away they put me on guard duty. I was in charge of guard duty. So I took a group of men and had told them, and we had guard duty. It was no problem. They were nice about it and everything. Only I did my guard duty different. In guard duty in the service, you were 2 hours on, 4 hours off, 2 hours on. When I had my boys on, I'd talk to them first. "Fellas, if you do a straight 4 hours, you're through. You don't have to do any more. Go to sleep." And they went for it. That's the way they did it. And all I had to do was check up on them, make sure they did their guard duty changes. And a lot of us came through after the Battle of Bulge, since we were searching body for food and everything and had ammunition. I found a dead German, I found a piece of black bread on him, I ate that. And by the time we got down to Birch's Garden, a lot of us came down with hepatitis and yellow jaundice, and we were flown back all the way to Reims, France, and taken care of. And that was the 1st Battalion of the 501, most of them, that came down with hepatitis and yellow jaundice, malnutrition. Every now and then a little story pops out. Some funny stories, and like used to do 2-mile patrols when the ranks were thin in Holland. I'd lay against the dike, and this one guy in C Company, I'd say, But how the hell is a guy like you got battlefield commission to an officer? How does a guy like you have 145 on your IQ tests and all that? The hell, if you've given as many tests as I had, you'd know how to take them, no problem. There was a dead German laying down there, a headless German, and the pigs would come down at night and eat into the body of the German and never touch the skin, only the body, or inside. We'd stuff up the body, and the next night we'd go over and meet him again, and because ranks were kind of thin, make contact. The pigs would come along again, pull out the rags, and go at it again. We swore we'd never eat pork again. Well, since I moved in this place here, I've eaten more pork in my whole life. Something about pork and me, I just doesn't get along. Spare ribs I love. Well, anyway.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
I appreciate you giving us your time,
appreciate you for doing all this.
Great interview.
These two here.
sharing with what you had.
All set?
Okay,
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
do you want any